Well,
There it is.
good evening, friends, and glad we could spend yet another evening today here in session six of Poetry Through the Ages. And, not only have we gotten up into the 20th century tonight, um, but we have gotten to America. Um, one of only two American poems in our class. And this one is one I used to not like, but have started to like a lot, and it's because of a reread. So we're going to get there. We're actually going to forefront the poem rather than we're going to get there pretty quickly. Before we do, I did want to start us out with just kind of reviewing one more time what a poem is. And now these five aspects of poetry, remember, are what we sort of developed and decided ourselves was a poem. First, I feel like they're coming up. Um, we said that poems help us visualize the subject through the concrete. Right? So there's a thing. I'm going to introduce you tonight to a thing that is important to me, the oldest thing that I have, and I don't know if I'm going to write a poem to it, but it's a concrete. So poems engage the reader's senses, their sight, sound, smell, touch, taste, and emotion, because I think emotion probably fits into the senses. Poems mean something, but it's usually so economical that it's hard to see, and we're going to see that tonight. The meaning is so economical that there is a vagueness that's not very clear. That can happen. Poems demonstrate this formal stuff. That's rhyme is so very common. Ending the lines. Almost every poem, unless it's called a thing called free verse, where it's just prose, really. Almost everything has the ending of lines. Sometimes sets of lines that work together, like quatrains. That's four lines. That's what our poem tonight has. And then the voice thing. And here's another way to say the same thing. Rather than what is a poem, I say, what do poets do? They use concrete imagery. They engage the senses. They make meaning. They experiment with formality, and they establish voice. Let me ask you guys a question. Of those five things that we have agreed a poet does, my question to you is, which one to you is most important? If you had to read a poem and you wanted to, if you want to absolutely make sure that the poem does this thing, or maybe if you were writing a poem and you think this is the most important, which one's most important to you?
Can I have a tie?
You got a tie. Great. So you want to choose two. What you got?
Yes, please. Thank you. Um, so I think sometimes the most thing is to establish a voice, but I think a lot of times in able to do that, you have to use concrete imagery.
Aha. I love it.
I don't know if those two can actually be separated sometimes.
Yeah. So cool. And it is absolutely possible to not do all of them. Could you imagine a poem that establishes voice and uses concrete imagery but doesn't really mean anything, or engages senses? It's possible. I'm thinking Dr. Seuss has a lot of voice in everything he writes, and there's lots of concrete imagery, but sometimes it doesn't mean anything, or it's just gibberish. It's almost words for words' sake, not for meaning's sake. But that's interesting. So you like voice and concrete imagery? I love it. Awesome. James, anyone that seems the most important to you?
Yeah, to me, I think it has to start with meaning.
Mm-hmm.
Everything else you can give or take, in my opinion. Not that there aren't poems with no meaning. There are, I just don't like them.
Yeah.
I'm not drawn to them. So for me, it has to start with meaning, and everything else you put onto it is the mechanism.
Yep. Yep. I like it. I'm going to agree. Man, I agree with both of you, but man, if I had to choose one, I'd say meaning. I can absolutely let go of the formality. Um, I don't know. Voice is important. Voice may be my favorite, but making meaning, I think, might be the most important. And what I really love, I'd love to choose four. No, I would choose all five. They're all so important. I think meaning's probably the most important. Interesting, none of us said experimentation with formality. And interestingly, all of the poems that we have read in our course have been focused on. They have focused on formality.
Of these other four.
I'm sorry. Say that again, Lisa Renee.
Oh, I just see a dichotomy here.
Oh,
There's four categories in this central thing. And then you have this one category over here that's by itself that's forcing rules onto
yeah.
this central thing.
Yeah, exactly right. Enforcing rules, and we had a neat moment, a great moment that James provided us a couple weeks ago when he provided a song, and I think a song may be the form of poetry that has the most concentration with formality because of the necessary attendance to meter and almost always rhyme and then this crazy beautiful box of music that it goes into. It's really interesting. I have so enjoyed working with you guys on the poem and looking for these areas. So let's do it again. One, like I said, tonight's poem is one that has become one of my favorites. When I read this in high school, it was not one of my favorites. It was okay, and I got it. But something happened to my read of this poem that made me like it, that appealed to me, and we'll get there. So let's take a look at it.
Wait,
Yep, go ahead.
Joe, can I ask when that happened? At what reread?
Yeah. So one of my favorite, most one of my favorite teachers of all time. Her name is Rosalind Knutson. Dr. Knutson was in my undergraduate program. She was a literature professor. Her specialty was the Renaissance, Shakespeare, John Donne, some of my absolute favorites. She was by far the most influential literature professor I've ever had, and she opened my eyes to this poem in a way that's rare. So yeah, I was guided to enjoy this poem more than I ever had before, and I'm going to be honest, I kind of hope to do that a little bit with you guys tonight. I'd like to take you on that trip. So if you don't mind, I'm gonna read it and then we'll talk about it. I'd like to talk about its meaning. Clearly, it's got um, four stanzas and 5 lines per stanza. It's got some rhyme in there, so plenty of formality if we want to look at the formality and more. So let's take a look. Two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both and be one traveler. Long I stood and looked down one as far as I could to where it bent in the undergrowth. Then took the other, as just as fair, and having perhaps the better claim because it was grassy and wanted wear, though as for that passing there had worn them really about the same. And both that morning equally lay in leaves no step had trodden black. Oh, I kept the first one for another day. Yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I ever should come back. I shall be telling this with a sigh, somewhere ages and ages hence. Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by. And that has made all the difference. Yeah. So let's talk about meaning. What is this poem? What is Robert Frost trying to say in this poem?
Life is a multitude of decisions. That's
Mm,
it. Yep, it's as simple as choosing a road, maybe as consequential, maybe not, as choosing a road.
yeah.
I think that's the best description of this poem I've ever heard.
I think
so
that's
too.
probably the most prominent description of this poem. I think that's what most people think, but I have heard other opinions that are just as strong.
Mm. Like what?
Let me see. I should have studied a little harder before I brought that up, thinking I was going to be all kinds of literature based.
Yeah.
It was somebody today that was trying to give meaning to every word he said,
Uh-huh.
and trying to convince you that all of a sudden he goes from this and this all-inclusive thought process in the first verse being a little bit more jovial
Yeah.
on down the line. But I'll tell you the two problems I had with the poem.
Yeah.
If you're ready for that, if not, we'll wait.
Please go right ahead.
Oh, one is thus far the passing there had warned them really about the same. He wouldn't know that.
Yeah. Let's go
You
back there.
don't know. You
Hold
don't
tight.
know that.
Yeah, hold tight. Let's go back to that. You just played you played a trick. You caught him. You caught him. Um. Yes. Then I took the other as just as fair, and having perhaps the better claim because it was grassy and wanted wear, though as for that passing there had warned them really about the same. Yeah, you're right. It's like, how do you know? Did you go back? Did you go back?
Or did you do it last week?
Yeah.
Or yeah.
Yeah.
But the most visual is me actually trying to stretch around as far as I can to see what's down that other road, just in case I want to take it.
Yeah.
And then the last thing I disagree with is I think it's something I would say to my friend when he's giving all of these reasons or she's giving all of these reasons. I'd say, yeah, that's what made the difference.
Yeah.
Out of all the decisions you made, that's the one that made the difference.
That made all the decision, exactly. Let me ask you this. Tell me again, what's the name of the poem?
The Road Not Taken.
Mm.
And that's not the one that made the difference, apparently. The one that made the difference is the one he did take.
Yeah. If you ask somebody, hey, what's that poem by Robert Frost about roads? They usually say The Road Less Traveled.
Yeah.
And there is literally, The Road Less Traveled is not only what they usually say the name of the poem is, and not only is that not the name of the poem, but the words The Road Less Traveled don't even exist in the poem. The closest we get is the last two lines: two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by. But it's not the road the road not less traveled by, or the road less traveled. It's the road not taken. To me, there's something going on here that I think is almost the definition of the thing we call American modernism. If I had to, I, in some respects, I'm kind of a. There are three periods of literature that I have studied the most, and they are the British Renaissance, Shakespeare, John Donne, Christopher Marlowe, Ben Jonson, and also ancient Greece, Plato, Aristotle, Socrates, and a host of others. Um, and a little bit of American modernism. And uh, for me, there's something that happens in 20th century American literature that is so introspective, so thoughtful about oneself. It's kind of it's kind of where my mind, I think, was born. And a lot of us that would be considered Generation X are sort of born in this time of seeking inward and thinking inward. Um, and I think that this poem is just crystallizes what American modernism is, and this whole question. In books like The Great Gatsby or Catch 22, or those books that are you are kind of sad, but the French have a term of it called ennui, which is to say thinking inward, kind of a mopey, maybe, or moody inward thought. And I believe that The Road Not Taken really crystallizes that inward thought. I want to read through it slowly. I do feel like it uses concrete imagery, this looking down a pathway, where there are two. We see the yellow wood, the leaves, the undergrowth. I can almost smell it, and for me, it smells moist and humid and cool. I'm not sure where I get that because I don't necessarily see that, but I think it's what good poetry does is pulls us pulls our own experience into the words and has us sort of inject our own experience into those words. It engages our senses in that way in order to make its meaning. And to me, obviously, there's an experiment with formality, 5 lines per stanza, end rhyme throughout, but clearly and definitively, I would sword fight with anyone on this. The formal experimentation in this poem is the least important part of it. I just don't think that is. It's almost not important at all. It does make the language kind of lovely, but much more important than the formality is the meaning that is woven here, even though, like we said, it's efficient meaning but vague. I'm not exactly sure, because really there are at least 2 ways to read this poem, right? I want to do it again. 2 roads diverged in a yellow wood, right? Mm-hmm. And sorry I couldn't travel both and be one traveler. Long I stood and looked down one as far as I could to where it bent in the undergrowth. So here I am looking down going, now you could say, why can't you travel both? I mean, have a go down some and then tomorrow take another direction. But of course, the meaning, the metaphor here and the meaning, that concrete image is there's a pathway and you can only go one. So I think we can agree that this is about life's choices. And Lisa Renee, you took us there immediately. Really good. So this metaphor is the diverging paths are life's choices, and you can't go back in time. And so look down the road and see. Right? Then I took the other as just as fair, so it just seemed just as nice, and having perhaps the better claim because it was grassy and wanted wear. So there's a statement. Maybe I should take this one because it was grassy and it was the road less traveled by. Okay, so maybe so. So I took the one because it had a better claim just because it appealed to me that it wanted wear. Fewer people had gone there. Though, as for that passing there, had worn them really about the same. So, just a few steps into it, I realized, trick photography. um, it looks to me like it's just about the same. And both that morning equally lay in leaves, no step had trodden black. So it's like maybe nobody walked here today, but I kept the first for another day. So I kept going the one I walked down, yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. So it's like, I guess I'm down here. I guess, I chose one, and I'm going down the road, and I can't go back. And so I chose. Now, what happens next is where the big riddle is. No question. In high school, I was taught to that all of the meaning was in the fourth stanza. I was taught, yes, this is it. In fact, maybe not the full last stanza, but the last three lines. Right? We're supposed to think this. Here's what you take out of the poem that most people think is called The Road Less Traveled. Two roads diverging in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. Right? You're supposed to think, um, uh, be a nonconformist. Do what people don't usually do. Take the road not traveled by, or the road less traveled by, and that will make all the difference in your life. Go do it. But those three lines are not the poem. In fact, those three lines are not the stanza. The stanza is, I shall be telling this with a sigh somewhere ages and ages hence. Two roads diverged in the wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that's made all the difference. And so the question is he serious, or is he just telling stories? Because it's, yeah, I don't know. What do you think?
Again, I hear in my head, yeah, that made the difference. All these decisions I made in my life, and that's the one that made the difference. Like, it's almost, just being facetious and
Yeah. I made choices every single day. I took paths every day, and who knows? I don't know, James. You wanna? What are you thinking?
No, I think there's a really good point to be made that when we learn about this in 11th grade, 10th grade, we have been told, instructed that this is about individualism, about, having some sort of unique character and saving that. And so that's how we come to it. I wonder if I were 50 years old and I came to this having never heard it before, just crossed it, if it would have much impact on me at all. I think it's a good story, a good poem, a good message, but I don't know that I would come to it. In fact, what I get from it today is that we all reconstruct our lives with today's knowledge.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
And I can tell you something that was very impactful today, and create my backstory.
Yes.
Without, I'm not doing it on purpose. It's just the way that I narrate my life.
Yeah.
That this thing happened, and therefore, I wouldn't be here today, young man, if it weren't for that fateful decision.
Yep, that's right.
Whether it was an complete flip of the coin, or the fates giving it to me, but I still want to make it seem like it was consequential, and that's just how we recreate our past when I tell you my narrative.
Yeah. Absolutely right. And anytime we do something that that comes across as wisdom.
Yeah.
In some respect, we are dramatizing a situation in a way that maybe it is wisdom, but is it really? I'll give you an example. I use a metaphor at work when somebody screws something up and has to be honest about what they did and be vulnerable. And here's the story I tell. Here in southeastern Virginia, we have the blue crab. And the blue crab molts its shell once a year between May and August. Turns into what we know as a soft shell crab and does that for less than a day. I think it's 6 to 8 hours. Sheds that exoskeleton. The only thing that is protecting it, the only thing that gives it any strength or power, sheds that shell and then grows, right? Absorbs the water around it, and actually it's the only time that it grows all year until the next 6 to 8 hours in which it forms that hard shell again, and then it's done growing. And how scary and uncomfortable and vulnerable it is. Not all soft shell crabs make it. By the way, they're delicious, right? And so if I'm a shell and I get to May and I start molting, on one hand, it's both the scariest, most uncomfortable, most vulnerable time of my life, and yet it's the only time that I can ever grow. Okay, so what I just did was made a metaphor and used it to exert wisdom, but none of it is true. It's just a metaphor, and it only works if our minds connect it. And if I use concrete imagery to engage the senses to make that meaning, that's actually that's the only way it actually makes any sense. Because anybody at any point could say, that makes no sense. You're talking to me about wildlife. What were we talking about here when I was in trouble at work? So it's crazy the way poetry, namely metaphors, and in this work, they only work if you connect it. And that's almost what Robert Frost is doing here, saying, I don't know if any of this matters. I have no idea if any of it matters, but I'll tell you this. One day when I tell the story, it's going to matter in that story. Yeah.
So, Joel,
Mm-hmm.
are you open? Do you invite other interpretation into your course?
Of course.
So I was reading today a woman named Catherine Robinson. She writes for a few social newspaper type things, and she was talking about how Robert Frost was really good friends with a man named Edward Thomas.
Mm-hmm.
And Edward Thomas was also an poet, but a very, very, very serious man. And he took every single decision that confronted him with great consideration and worry.
Yes.
And this was actually a joke
right.
to his best friend. His best friend didn't get it. But he was really making light of, you got these two paths in the woods, dude. Take one.
Yeah.
Stop stressing about it.
That's right.
Because, that's going to make the difference.
Right.
And so I enjoyed that. Yep. And for some reason, even though I had not really ever sat around and talked about my feelings of Robert Frost, for some reason that resonated with me.
Yeah.
More than this big, mushy, gooey sentimentality of, oh goodness, life is, and now it's over and now I can't undo it. I like the comedic side myself.
Exactly right, and that is a true story. So this poem was started as a scrap, almost a letter poking fun, and then it underwent some revision. But yes, we took it to mean we sort of adopted it in the later part of the 20th century as a 3-line poem.
Yeah.
Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that's made all the difference. And we took those three lines, which I think are very nicely written, out of the poem and turned this poem into something that it wasn't. And the day that Dr. Rosalind Knudsen introduced me to that read, it almost completely opened up poetry fresh for me, because it made me say, jokes on us, and yeah. Hmm.
What if it's the same poem, but she explained it differently, or he? Would it have the same impact on you?
Um, well, I mean, if you build more context around it, I would think that it could continue. Do you have another interpretation?
Oh, well, you'd have to give me some time. And I'm almost out of sake.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what. I do want to return to this poem, and I do have another take on it.
I have
Oh,
as I was sitting here thinking, the opposite of this poem, and this is not great art, I guess, but is Forrest Gump,
mm,
where all of these really super consequential things happen to him, but he just thinks it's a coin flip. He's not even aware.
yeah,
And, and the humility. I mean, again, it's a silly movie, but it's just the opposite. Where this is trying to find meaning, where maybe it's almost a joke.
yeah.
I think it's a beautiful, lovely poem. And I love the fact that it has allowed so many people to interpret it so many different ways.
I do too. That is kind of a beautiful thing. I agree. Yeah, yeah. I don't think I would always have agreed with that. I think that as a younger man, I probably would have been sort of more arrogant and said, no, 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 you're missing it. You're a simpleton. You're a fool. Um, uh, if you don't get it the way I get it. But no, not these days. These days, I think there are actually a lot of different ways to enjoy this poem, even just the concrete imagery, quite frankly. But I do have one more way I want to enjoy it with you, and that is to speak back to it. There's one more thing that I don't usually hear talked about when looking at this poem, and that is, who's he talking to? I mean, who is his audience here? It almost seems like he's sort of musing or talking to himself. I don't know. It's
That's
almost
what
like,
I think. It feels like it's a very personal thing. It feels like almost like I could have written this poem while I watched,
yeah.
because I would have been thinking about these things.
Yes, 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 yes. Kind of this internal dialogue. Another piece of American modernism, right? It's like he's talking to himself, and like, should I go this way? I don't know. This way? Well, I guess it's got more grass. Maybe I'll try that. And I don't know. It seems about the same. You know what? I'll probably be talking later on and say this was a big important thing, but I don't know. It's almost like he's having this internal dialogue. And that is what this poem has made me do over time. And I want to get to why that is here in just a minute. First thing I want to do is I'm very sad that Jenna wasn't able to be with us. She participated in the homework today, which was to, hey, tell me what your story was, and so she wrote back and just kind of reminded us about her story that was impactful for her. And her story went like this: at age 16, I had the experience of traveling from San Diego, California, to Alberta, Canada, by Greyhound bus. I'd be attending a boarding school without returning home for 9 months. As we passed through Montana, I'd fallen asleep on the bus, but was awakened when people on the bus started yelling, "Snow, snow!" I woke up and looked out the window, witnessed snow actually falling from the sky. I had never seen that before. We had visited the mountains when we begged Daddy to take us to the snow, but never did we see it snow. When the bus got to the border crossing in Canada, everyone got out of the bus and the border patrol had to inspect everyone's border crossing papers. I didn't have a passport and I'm not sure it was required. However, they wanted to see proof that I was indeed accepted into the school. and on her story goes. James, you provided one as well, and yours was a little longer. But the reason I wanted you guys to send me a story in prose, not worrying about the poetic aspects of it, is because I just wanted you to get it out. I wanted to get it out of your system so you had it on the page. And no big surprise, I probably already said this in one way or another. The final assignment for the class, if you choose to accept it, is going to be to turn your story into a poem. Um, and use those 5 characteristics: concrete imagery, invoking the senses, the meaning. Me is pretty much the most important part. Creating the meaning, but in a more economical way, even if that meaning is hidden some, because it's short. Usually a poem's going to be shorter than a story, unless you're Samuel Taylor Coleridge and somebody reads it out loud forever. So that's there, and some kind of attention to formality, even if it's just end lines, but whatever formality, and then finally evoking voice. So I do hope each of you will take your experience and turn it into a poem over the next week, and we're going to have a great celebration reading our final poem for those of you who want to do that. So I hope you'll participate. But what I wanted to do is I'm going to do something that I haven't done in our entire class, and I don't think I'll necessarily do this next week either. I just thought I'd do it tonight only, and that is share my story and show how I turned it into a poem. And so this is, you could use this as a model if you wanted to, of the transition from prose to poem, from story to poetry. And here's my story. When I graduated high school, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do with my life. I knew my parents couldn't afford to send me and my brothers to college, and I knew I didn't want to go into debt for school. My true love was music. I loved to play and write music, and I dreamed of moving to LA and becoming a recording artist. But I knew the chances of that happening were so incredibly slim, and college probably made more sense. My mom heard about a scholarship where I could apply to college and attend for free as long as I kept an A average. I decided to go to the university, and I always told myself, I'll go to college for as long as it makes sense. When college stops making sense, I'm headed to LA. That day never came. College kept working, and after 10 years, I had a PhD in English and became a professor. The past 20 years, I've been a college administrator. Somehow, college never stopped making sense, and I never made it to LA. That's my story. And I think possibly this story may be why I enjoy The Road Not Taken so much, because that's the story. This is my road not taken. And James, you asked a question. When did you start liking it so much? And I think I probably gave you the wrong answer. The answer I gave you is when I unlocked the Road Not Taken's power. But when I started to see this story as important about who I am as it is, that's when Robert Frost's The Road Not Taken has become much more powerful for me. In a sense, Robert Frost, The Road Not Taken is what I have here. So not long ago, I kind of realized that and made a decision that I was going to rewrite The Road Not Taken in the form of The Road Taken. And here's what I wrote. Call me. Call me when you get down to the end of the road you've taken that makes so much more sense. Call back to me from where the undergrowth is bent. Has the road more traveled by made the difference? because I could only choose once. Long I stood and looked down as far as I could. I doubt that I could ever come back. 2 roads diverged in a yellow wood. I won't blame you if the trees come crashing down. How could you know every step to take? I won't shame you if the leaves all turn to brown. So call back and tell me what difference it made. Call me. Call me when you get down to the road. As the road more traveled by made the difference. So this is a different type of internal dialogue. It's an internal dialogue, whereas Robert Frost's internal dialogue is one almost with himself at the same moment. This is an internal dialogue separated by 30 years, where the young poet, young Joel, who is standing at the nexus of the 2 roads diverged in a wood, is calling to the future dude who took the road more traveled by, and saying, I gotta choose one. Tell me how that one looks from there.
Mm.
You know?
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely, you're writing it to your son as he struggles with what I struggled with, what a lot of people do. I think when they have to make this first decision that changes their life, where to go to college, and they think that there's a right answer,
Right.
and a wrong answer, and man, I wish I could go back and tell my 18-year-old self, there's no right answers.
Right answer.
There's no wrong answer.
One of them looks a little bit better from here and calls to you for some reason, but take a few steps in, and it's about the same. So the best you can do is imagine that we'll all say it made all the difference one day, but I don't know. Yeah. If you'll indulge me, I want to show you the oldest object I have. I don't know exactly how old it is, but Mom and Daddy bought this piano so that we could play it and learn it. So I would have to imagine it's probably, I don't know, just about as old as I am, maybe. I got to think maybe in maybe the 80s, so maybe not quite as old as me. And I took this piano. It didn't really sneak it out of the house, but Mama and Daddy allowed me to take it with me when I left to go to school. And I plan to get a new piano at some point, but as for now, this is the one I've always played my entire life, and this is the road taken. Call me, when you get down to the end of the road that makes so much sense. Go back to me from where the undergrowth went. Cast about my dream, but made a difference. 'Cause I can only choose once. I stood and looked down as far as I could. ghost of bird she lay I won't blame you if the trees come crashing down. How could you know everything I did? I won't shame you if the leaves are turned around. Come back and tell me what difference it made. I know I could only choose once. I stood and looked down as far as I could. I doubt I could ever come back to ghost of bird she lay above. Call me when you get down to the end. As the road more traveled by faith and Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thanks.
Thanks for letting me do that. I tend to think that music is the best of poetry. I think that music is the strongest, purest, deepest. I think it clearly has the most formal considerations and allows everything else to happen, and yet it builds it builds the strongest box. It's really interesting, and yeah, thanks for letting me share that. I'm glad
Thank
it
you,
was just.
Joel.
Yeah.
I'm impressed that your poem works as a poem as well as a song. Mine never do. They don't read very well.
Mm, mm,
You know, they might be an okay song, but they just read so cheesy
mm.
because of those rhymes that you have to feel like you have to do.
I think that is what makes Bob Dylan the the greatest. He is the worst singer of all time. But his songs work both as poems and songs, and they don't seem stretched.
Yeah,
You know, they don't seem
forced.
yeah, forced. Uh, Read Tangled Up in Blue, and it doesn't matter whether it's a song or a poem. It's all there. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for letting me share. Your homework, if you choose to accept it for our final evening, is to turn your story into a poem. As many as those devices as you'd like, and then we'll read one more poem together, and I will thank you for indulging me in 7 Tuesday nights.
Thank you.
Thank you. You guys satisfied?
I'm pretty happy.
Good.
Is that satisfaction?
Yeah, that is. I think it is.
Okay.
Mhm.
You sure? I mean, we could interpret that many different ways.
Yeah.